Which hand do you think is more important? Your fretting hand or your picking hand? For almost every player, it's actually the picking hand, but not for the reasons you're thinking right now. Even though your fretting hand has a lot to do, it's got all these strings, all these frets, in reality, picking is what gives most players real technical issues. And it can even trick you into thinking that you're making mistakes in your left hand, when in reality, the root problem lies in how you pick. I know that sounds super crazy, but that's why I had to make this video. Because I see way too many players chasing the wrong solutions for their technique problems and end up getting stuck, not getting any better, even though they spend time practicing. Think about it for a second. Picking is where every note begins. Without plucking the string, there's no sound. And if there's no sound, there's no reason to move your left hand. Plucking the string is what creates the action on the guitar, and the fretting hand simply reacts to it. So if you get the picking part wrong, there's a real good chance that everything downstream from there is going to be compromised in some way. Now, most players judge their picking based on two things: speed and accuracy. How fast can you play, and how cleanly can you play? If speed is your problem, then practicing slowly isn't going to get you any better, unless you tackle the mechanical issue at the root of the problem. Otherwise, you're just playing and practicing using a bad motion, and you're just doing that real slowly. And if playing cleanly and accurately is your problem, then practicing that lick or that solo over and over and over again, that's not going to help either. All you're doing is ingraining your lack of accuracy. Instead, the way to actually improve your picking is to tackle the issue of poor biomechanics and how your pick is moving through the air and contacting the string. So if you're stuck and you're not getting any better, even though you spend time practicing, your picking isn't getting cleaner or faster, then I can virtually guarantee that you're making one of the top 5 most common picking mistakes. So, what exactly is picking? You're basically swinging an implement through the air and trying to hit something that's really, really small, about 1/100th of an inch thick. Imagine how hard it is to hit a baseball going 80 miles an hour. Now, imagine taking that baseball and shrinking it down to the size of a marble. Could you hit it every time? I mean, the only way you'd be able to hit it every time is if your technique was flawless and the ball was delivered in the exact same spot every single time, predictably. I bring this up because accurate picking starts before you even move your pick at all. Just like a batter has to set his feet before taking a swing, you have to set your position on the guitar that will lead to accurate picking. You have to create a foundation for your picking. Most of us actually touch the guitar in some way with our right hand when we're playing. We use our wrist, our hand, our forearm. We touch it in some way in order to create an anchor point. The problem is when you use the wrong anchor point. I see way too many players using their pinky as an anchor point on the guitar, and this absolutely destroys your ability to play cleanly and quickly. And I know what you're going to say, oh, but my favorite guitar player does that, Tommy Emmanuel does that, or this guy does that. And no offense, you're not Tommy Emmanuel. If you were, you wouldn't be watching this video. And the reality is Tommy Emmanuel, he might be able to get away with it because he started doing it when he was 6 years old. So if you've been playing for 2, 3, 4 decades and you're not as good as Tommy Emmanuel, sticking your pinky out like this isn't going to get you there. And so why is this bad? Why is holding your pinky on the pick guard or on the face of the guitar, why is that a problem? If you look at it for a second, the answer seems obvious. Holding your pinky like this and pressing on it and sticking it out straight, that's not a relaxed movement. It's incredibly costly and uses like a ton of muscle energy. And I mean, just look at it for a second. Look at this, look at that, and compare it to that. One is using no energy. This one is using quite a bit of energy. And if you want to play relaxed, and you do, because relaxation equals efficiency equals speed and accuracy, then starting from a position of tension, that's not a good foundation to start with. And this goes for every part of your setup, every part of your body. If you look at yourself in a mirror and you grab the guitar and you notice you're doing this, or this, or this, or something where you're holding tension somewhere in your body, you're setting yourself up for failure because that tension is going to magnify as you go through the song and get to harder and harder sections, more challenging picking, that tension isn't going to all of a sudden disappear. And you might not actually use this anchor point, which is fine. Excellent, actually. But you use some anchor point, I almost guarantee that. You touch the guitar somewhere. Maybe it's your wrist, maybe it's your fingers here, more than just your pinky. It's something. You're touching the guitar somewhere. And you really have to watch out that you're not using excess tension in your anchor point. Because if you are, that anchor point, that's your foundation. That's where you're touching the guitar. Tension there is going to lead to tension in your picking. You know, some of us, like me, I rest my wrist on the bridge a lot of times when I'm playing. A lot of my students, a lot of amateur players I see, they do the same thing. A lot of pros do the same thing. But when you're looking at the best guitar players, I mean like the best in the world, they all have something in common with their picking hand. Their picking hand looks super relaxed all the time. It doesn't look like they're fighting and tense and tight and holding and gripping their hand in some unnatural way. So sit in front of a mirror, take a close look at how you set up to the guitar. What is your foundation on the instrument? Does it look in the mirror like you have tension? Do you feel like you're tight? What if you just relaxed everything? Would something move? Because if you're starting here and you relax and your hand changes position, that means you're not relaxed when you start, even though you might think you are. So you got to set up to the guitar, completely go limp, and see if your position changes. Because if it does, that's probably the position you should be picking from. So ultimately, you should pick an anchor point that allows you to start relaxed and stay relaxed. So that means no extended pinky, no extended fingers, no curling your hand into a fist. Grab the pick, just go limp with your hand, and find an anchor point that you can maintain that position. Picking is such a difficult thing to do, and unfortunately, I see way too many amateurs making it more difficult than it needs to be. Now, it comes down to predictability and being able to know exactly how that pick is going to interact with the string when it makes contact. Now, the angle of your pick determines so much about your picking that if you're not careful, you're probably losing a ton of accuracy, speed, relaxation, and a bunch of other things to having an imperfect angle. And so what do I mean by angle? Well, the angle of your pick as it attacks the string is going to probably change as you're playing. And unfortunately, I see way too many amateurs and intermediate players doing this thing, getting real handsy with their thumb and index finger. You're basically changing the angle of your pick constantly. And if your pick is changing angles constantly, then you can't accurately predict what angle it's going to be at when it makes contact. And that's a big, big problem for consistency. You know, even a slight change in angle can have a really big effect on your playing. And to prove this, I'll show you the two extremes. Take your pick, lay it flat against the string, so it's just totally, completely flat. Now try to push that through. You're met with a lot of resistance because the pick is just flat laying on the string. Now do the opposite. Take your pick and hold it vertically, like perpendicular to the string, and now push it through. You have almost no resistance, but the tone is really weak, there's hardly any volume. Now these are the two extremes. And what you probably want something in the middle. Now the problem comes when your angle changes from stroke to stroke. If one stroke your angle's 30 degrees and the next one it's 45 degrees, then your brain can't accurately predict how much resistance it's going to meet when it hits the string. And your tone is going to change, your volume is going to change, everything is going to change from stroke to stroke. Now multiply that by the thousands of pick strokes you're going to do over the course of a song. And you could see it starts to get really, really complex. But it's not just this thumb motion that causes it. So if you're saying, well, I don't do this, but you might do something else that changes your angle. And when you're picking and changing strings, that's one of the prime spots where most people get it wrong and change the angle of their pick. So let's say you get everything right. Let's say you have a nice relaxed anchor point, your wrist is here, fingers are comfortable, you're ready to go, and then you start playing your scale. If you get to here and you notice you're in this position, you made a big mistake. This move of changing strings pivoting from your wrist will absolutely destroy pretty much everything about how you pick. Because when you're here and you're on your starting string where you are naturally set up in your comfortable, relaxed anchor position, and then you change strings by pivoting, you're changing the angle of your pick on every single string. And so by the time you get up to the high E string, your pick's a lot closer to vertical than when it started. And if it's closer to vertical, then you're going to have way less resistance, you're going to have way weaker tone, you're going to have way less volume, and your ear is going to try to compensate for that. It's going to say like, hey, this is really quiet. Maybe we need to dig in harder. Maybe we need to tighten and really push here because we're not getting the same amount of volume. Everything sounds inconsistent. And your body's going to want to try to naturally adapt and compensate for that. When in reality, all you got to do is not pivot as you change strings. Instead, what you want to do is you want to slide up and down the bridge with your wrist as you change strings. This way you can actually keep the angle consistent. Notice how the position of my hand when I'm on the low E stays the same all the way to the high E. I'm not pivoting from my wrist and keeping my wrist up here on the low E. I'm sliding it along the bridge for every string change I make. A consistent angle means consistent picking. And if your brain doesn't know how much resistance your pick is going to meet when it gets to the string, it doesn't know how much force to apply. And this leads to excess tension, gripping too tight, and ultimately just slow and cumbersome and inaccurate playing. So the remedy for bad angles is to essentially just relax your thumb, keep it neutral, and move from the wrist when you're doing alternate picking. Then when you go to change strings, instead of pivoting from the wrist, you want to slide that wrist up and down the bridge. Angles aren't the only thing that need to be symmetrical about your picking. Symmetry is really the ultimate way to ensure consistent, even, accurate picking. And if you're going to be consistent, even, and accurate, you're probably going to be relaxed, which means you'll probably pick faster. And you can see this when you walk. Your footsteps travel about the same distance each time. And that's what needs to happen with your picking. The distance your pick travels should be symmetrical, and unfortunately, it's probably not. When you strike the string, your pick ends up going past it. And then when it comes back for the upstroke, it goes past it again in the opposite direction. The issue comes when the distance isn't equal on both sides of the string. If it goes an inch past the string on the downstroke, but only half an inch past on the upstroke, that's a 100% difference in your two strokes, which means your pick is getting to the string later on one stroke and earlier on the other, leading to a galloping sound and really uneven alternate picking. And not only should the distance be symmetrical, but it should be as short as necessary to get the sound that you're looking for. I mean, once again, if you're going an inch past on the downstroke, that means you have to travel 1 inch back before you even make contact with the string. So that's 2 inches of movement in between strokes. That could be a lot, and that added up over the course of a song, it's a lot of extra movement. So basically, what you want is you want a short stroke that goes the same distance on either side of the string. And one of the best tests for this is doing an open string tremolo. If your distances are symmetrical, you'll end up with that machine gun sound. But if they're asymmetrical, you're going to end up with a really uneven and obviously wrong tremolo sound. So if you find that your tremolo is really uneven sounding or not consistent, and some notes are popping out really loud, some notes aren't, you're missing some, you don't get the machine gun sound, then dial it back a notch. Focus on medium tempo eighth notes and use your eyes to see how far past the pick, or how far past the string, your pick is traveling in each direction. You're going to have to eyeball it, but that's okay. And you need to begin to see it and then eventually learn how to feel that distance and learn how to control it using feel, because you're not going to be watching your right hand, you're going to be watching your left hand. And learning how to feel symmetry in your pick is one of the highest forms of advanced picking. So start working on it now, because it will develop. Now, when it comes to picking, there are basically 3 dimensions. We've already talked about 2 of them, angles and distance, but there's a third. And the third dimension is depth. How deep does your pick sink into the string when you play a note? In the last section on distance, I asked you to do a tremolo exercise. Did you happen to pay attention to how deep your pick was going when you were doing that? Because depth is really important when you're doing a tremolo exercise. In fact, depth and distance are so closely linked, they're nearly the same thing. They're not exactly the same, but they're nearly the same thing. See, when you apply pressure to the string with your pick, something eventually has to give, and it's usually the string. And when that string finally breaks, the pressure that you've built allows your hand and your pick to fly past the string. That creates the distance. And so when your pick sinks deep into the string, the resistance is greater, so you have to apply more pressure. And when that string finally breaks, your pick is going to go a lot farther past the string. So basically, a deeper pick equals a louder note, but a farther distance. A shallower pick equals a quieter note, but a closer distance. And that's why tremolo picking has to be done with a really shallow depth, because in order to play quickly, you can't build up a lot of pressure against the string because that takes too long and it forces your pick to travel too far past. So in order to play quickly, you got to stay really, really shallow, and that's how you do proper tremolo. Now, all things being equal, you can pick faster when you're playing shallow, with shallow depth. You'll be quiet, but you'll be picking faster. Now, the caveat to this is angle, the other dimension of picking. As you angle your pick, you're relieving some of the pressure that would have built up otherwise. If you play with a flatter pick and sink your pick deep into the string, you'll be met with one level of resistance. If you angle that pick and sink it to the same depth, you'll have less resistance because now the pick is slicing through the string instead of building up as much pressure by laying flat. All of this makes for a super complex calculus of moves when you take angles, distance, and depth into account. And so if you're changing one of these dimensions or more than one in between strokes, well, there's no wonder that you can't pick consistently, accurately, cleanly. It's because there's way too many variables changing all the time and your brain can't predict them all. And so once again, you have to learn how to feel this. And so when it comes to depth, what you want is you want to take your normal, natural angle of attack and see what the different depth creates as far as resistance is concerned. When you're a little shallower, what's the resistance feel like? When you go deeper with your natural angle, what does that resistance feel like? What happens when you change? Can you change the depth without changing the angle? You need to begin to experiment with these different varieties in order to learn how to control your pick, especially when you're not looking at it. And a really good exercise to practice is learning how to do volume control with your pick, because ultimately depth is what creates volume. When you're really shallow, there's not a lot of pressure built up on the string, so you get a quiet note. When you're really deep, you build up more pressure, so you get a louder note. And so the exercise, we're going to just play like a C major scale. And you've got 8 notes. Now the job that you need to try to achieve here is you're going to start with the quietest note that you can play while still getting some note out of your guitar, whether it's acoustic or electric. And then by the time you get to the 8th note, the higher C, you want to be at the loudest possible note you can muster. Now the trick is you need to move up in stages of volume evenly, which means you need to be able to apply slightly more depth, but an even increase in depth throughout the entire scale. In order to do this, you really have to have a good level of control over the depth and angle of your pick. And it's as much a listening exercise as it is a picking exercise, because what you need to do, not only do you need to feel that happening in your pick, but you need to hear the volume you need in your ear before you play the next note, and then try to sync your pick to the correct depth that will equal the volume you hear in your head. So it's a very complex exercise. Seems simple, but it's not that easy. Now, the final and probably most important mistake that amateur guitar players make is that you're practicing wrong. Yeah, you practice wrong. Or rather, you practice inefficiently. I'm going to guess, but you probably run endless repetitions of something over and over and over, trying to get one of them correct. And you probably get a couple good ones, but followed by a bunch of bad ones. And I know this for teaching for over like 20 years. Players think that if they get one good one, then that's going to turn into more good ones. But it doesn't. That good rep that you got, it's probably just a false positive. You probably got a little lucky and it worked out one time. You accidentally did the right thing and then followed it up with sort of faulty biomechanics and ended up with a bunch of bad reps after that. And all that did was ingrain the negative, bad biomechanics into your playing because you're getting fewer good ones than you are bad ones. Which unfortunately means that your practice session wasn't that successful because your practice strategy is wrong. You probably have no problem picking one solid, clean note. And you wouldn't have a problem picking another solid, clean note. So it's not the picking of the note necessarily that's the issue. It's what's happening to your pick in between the notes. If you have issues with your picking, if you're not as fast as you want to be, if you're not as clean as you want to be, then it's because you're changing one of the three elements of picking in between those strokes. So you pick one, and then your pick changes angle, changes distance, changes depth before getting to the next note. So what you really want to do is you want to practice plucking a note, moving to the next string, and then not playing that note. So you play a downstroke, and then you rush as fast as possible to the next string for the upstroke. And you plant your pick on the string, but you don't play it. So you plant your pick, and then you have to see what position you arrived in when you got to that next string for the upstroke. Is your depth different than it was for the downstroke? Is the angle the same? Did it change? How far past the string did you go before having to come back to plant your pick for the upstroke? See, the position that you arrive into your next note, that will determine what happens with that note. And if one of the elements changes there, then one of the elements is going to change again on the next one. And so what you need to do is you need to pluck a note, plant on the next note, and see what changed. Then adjust, pluck, plant, and see again. And that's really how you get good at understanding what's really wrong with your picking. Because I could tell you about angles and distance and depth and stuff, but if you can't figure out which one is going wrong, then it doesn't help you. So you need to be able to diagnose your own playing, and this is the test to do that. And I'd love to hear in the comments what you guys came up with. Is your problem depth? Is it angle? Is it distance? Is it some combination of all three? Go ahead and let me know in the comments. Tell me what you think. And you don't have to just do this on open strings. You can play scales. You can play finger patterns. You can pick whatever left-hand notes you want. It'll make things more complicated because now you add in an element of your left hand. But you can practice this on any set of notes. The idea is to pay attention to what is your pick doing in between the strokes and how is it arriving to the next one. Then, and only then, can you actually get to the root of your picking problems and find out what's really wrong. Why can't you play quickly? Why can't you play cleanly? Just running repetitions endlessly is not going to magically all of a sudden turn you into a great picker. It hasn't already, otherwise you wouldn't be here watching this video. And this strategy works just as well for your fretting hand. So if you want to find out some of the most common left-hand mistakes that players make, go ahead and click this video. And dedicate some serious time to analyzing and diagnosing the real technical issues that are slowing you down.